Great day, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Talk to Me Chef podcast. I'm your host, Diamond McNulty, and I'm always extremely excited for y'all to join us inside the studio where we do two things. One, we want to have a chance to speak with some amazing individuals in the culinary space, and we want to tell their stories so that our youth can take that pathway and utilize it for their success. So, as I said, my name is Diamond McNulty. Not only am I the host of the Talk to Me Chef podcast, I'm the founder and CEO of Chef Diamond and Friends, a brand to help our youth, teach them how to cook, empower them to eat healthy, and Taste the Diamond Catering here in Atlanta, Georgia. But today we have a special guest. I'm so excited. I'm extremely excited to have this gentleman, this scholar, this amazing individual to speak with today, to tell you all about his entire journey. Today, we're going to speak to Mr. Richard Grausman, the founder and CEO. Right now, he is the chairman emeritus at CCAP, the Careers Through Culinary Art. He's a trailblazer, an author, a graduate of the Cordon Bleu, an educator, and he has bridged the gap for a lot of youth, even in the inner cities, throughout the school system to actually have a career in the culinary space. I want to bring him on, and I want to thank him for joining us. Let's get started. Hey, great day,
Morning.
Richard. How you doing today?
Doing well, Diamond. Good to see you.
Awesome. Great to see you as well. I'm excited. You know, when you get a chance to have a one-on-one with someone of you, like you, who has opened the doors for so many, right? Myself included, right? So it means a lot. It truly means a lot. So I'm excited to tell your story, your journey. And so, Richard, before we even get started, is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience?
Not to start with, except that I'm very excited to be with you, Diamond. As an alum of CCAP, I'm very proud of what you've been able to do and what you're doing now. And I love to follow the pathways of our alums because we get a lot of youth started focused on the industry and opportunities. I don't always know in which direction they're going. I didn't know that doing what you're doing until we connected. I guess it was on Facebook or something. And that often is the case. And I love to keep up with graduates, to help them, make connections for them. And that's an area that now that I'm, quote, semi-retired and not, active daily with the program, I sit on the board and I work with policy, and I always trying to raise money for the program. But my passion is to keep up with our graduates, follow them, see where they're going, and continue to help them, whether they're switching jobs, whether they're starting businesses, whether they're looking for a new pathway. Although the program is careers through culinary arts programs, a lot of people don't understand that terminology because when I started, it was in 1990, tremendous unemployment, especially with youth. Inner city youth. And I had come from a career of teaching for Cordon Bleu in Paris, and where my students were all very avid, interested French cooking adults, had written a book about my teaching. And I saw the opportunity to make an effect on the palate of America by getting into schools and introducing kids to new flavors and new tastes before they left high school. Because I know that once you leave high school, you don't do anything you don't want to do. And if you're used to hamburgers, pizza, and fried chicken, that's your diet. And somebody suggests you try something, and you say, I don't like it. And so I thought that by getting into the schools, I could at least affect a change of the palate. And it wasn't until I got into it that I saw that most of the students in the classroom had nowhere to go. They had no idea what they were going to do. So that's where the idea of creating careers for these students who I was finding in their culinary arts program. So as an organization that's called Culinary Arts Program, but it's not our program. It's the school's program where we find the students and help them get careers. It's a hard name to explain to people. And I've had board members over the years that said, change your name, Richard. Nobody understands it. But I use the acronym of CCAP And that he caught on with the industry. The chefs
Mm-hmm.
knew us as CCAP. So everybody may not understand the philosophy of the program and the theory of the program, but they know that a CCAP graduate has been prepared for entry-level work.
But for yourself too, because you've written a book, it was really around that time when you realized that the palette of America needed to change, correct?
Yeah, it was while I was when I was traveling around the country teaching for the Cordon Bleu School, and my classes were in department stores, auditoriums, the cities I went to. I would go out and eat in the city, and the fast food was limited in palate. We didn't have all the ethnic cuisine coming into area to work on. And it was that sort of wasteland, in my mind, limited opportunities to eat, that got me started. But once I got into the classroom and I found these students with no future in their prospects, that's when I said, let me see if I can't find a path for them to get into the industry. But in cooking, there's such a need, and there always such a need, that the chefs would tell me, all you have to do, Richard, is send me a kid that will show up on time. And I said, is that all? He said, yeah, if they show up on time, I'll teach them. And I said, well, what about knife skills? Oh, if they have knife skills, I don't have to start them on the dishwasher. Not a good idea, but it was a good idea for educators. I could tell your teacher and your parents that I was training you to be a prep cook. And from a prep cook, you go to a line cook, and a line cook, you go to a sous chef. And then, so I could describe a pathway that educators and parents would accept for their kids.
Yeah.
If I had said, look, the first thing the student has to do is learn how to wash dishes and clean floors. They said, that's not for us. We're educators. We're training them to make money. And so I found out that not only did you have to show up on time, when he's finished with what I asked him to do, he goes out and has a smoke or he sits down. Got to show me that he wants to work. Added that to it. After 5 years, I found out not only did they have to show up on time and want to work, they had to want to learn. Keep a little pad. Ask me questions. Why am I using that mushroom instead of this one? Be inquisitive, want to learn. Then, you had to progress, you had to have some basic skills. And those skills, safety, sanitation, and knife skills. So, because I want you prepared on the first day of work to do whatever's necessary. After that breakfast, I had people coming up to me from grandparents, parents, teachers. There was a minister, there was a board member. And they were all thanking me for talking to the students as I did. And I said, what's that? You told them what life is really about. And I said, bingo. That's the wrong instruction. You should have told them, even though you're going to, because of your education, even though you're going to start where your parents and grandparents start, you're going to progress much faster. You're going to rise in your business or industry, and you will eventually make more money than your family, your parents and grandparents ever made. But because of what they were trying to convince the students to do, to stay in school, they were getting a whole generation of students, not only in culinary, not only in high school, but in college too, that came out feeling that they didn't have to do entry-level work. I went to Duke University for 4 years and I paid $100,000 a year. I'm not going to file papers. I'm not going to answer the telephone.
Entitled mindset. Yeah.
Entitled. Right. So when I found even friends of my daughter who had graduated that summer, I heard them complaining and I said, girls, entry level. I said, look, no matter what happens in entry level work, you keep your ears open, your eyes open, and guaranteed you won't be doing the work that you're starting with in a little while. And students coming out of culinary school wanted to be chefs or sous chefs right away. They didn't want to be doing prep, cutting vegetables and lifting crates out of the storage room and putting things in the store, or mopping floors or cleaning the equipment. So we had to tell the teachers how to talk to their students. Most of the teachers would figure out how to teach their students if they knew what to teach. So
correct.
After 3 years, 4 or 5 years, I said to the industry, I said, look, if a CCAP student comes for a job
Hello, my name is Diamond McNulty. I'm the executive chef here at Chef Diamond and Friends, and I want to welcome you to our amazing programming. We have at school programming where we have weekly or monthly programming, and we also have our Meet the Chef experience where our chef come out and meet with the students and have book signings as well. At home, we have homeschool throughout the day, we have after school, and we also have family engagements on Friday. So no matter if you're a young chef, mighty chef, or if you're a diamond chef, we want to see you inside of the kitchen. We want you to compete in our champion chef competitions, and we want to have you be featured in our Young Chef magazine. So I look forward to meeting with you, chefs. Visit www.chefdiamondandfriends.com. Can't wait to see you inside of the kitchen. Take care. Have a wonderful day.
You can be confident that they'll show up on time. They want to work. They want to learn. They have basic safety, sanitation, knife skills, and they're not afraid to use them up. So that attitude and those few skills, our students were just rising in work. Chefs didn't want to have them leave. The average worker would work 6 months a year and then switch jobs. But if the chef kept teaching them, they'd want to stay and learn more. And if the chef kept giving them more of a salary, they saw their progress. So that was really the secret sauce of empowerment, because that's all we do. Empower the teacher to empower their students to get ahead. If you're going into industry, things have changed dramatically from the time we started.
Professionalism was important.
If the chef that's in the kitchen has discipline for their staff as far as the quality of the preparation, the food, how that person looks, doesn't necessarily enter into the work and the finished product. And if you want to work in that kitchen, if you want to learn from that chef, if you want to learn about that food, you do what you have to do to get that education. And then years from now, when you open your own restaurant and you want to make it ethnic, soul restaurant or whatever, you're the chef. And it's for you to establish your standard. If you're going to go start, you have to be able to start at the level that the industry wants you to start. You can't just go to school. You can't start up here. You don't learn the basics. It's very hard to go in high school. Have to have the understanding what they're doing at a lower level. And when I see them, I see a seemingly well-adjusted individual focused on their career and what they want to do. There was a moment there when he said, that teacher who believed in me, because I didn't believe in myself, changed my life. And when I was introduced to CCAP, I saw my future potential.
Definitely.
So that is the key. And that's the reason I started the program. Students, adults, people in the industry, when I started, they would say, Richard, you taught for the Cordon Bleu for 15 years. How can you let the teachers teach knife skills to their students? Why don't you go into the schools and teach it? And I said, I don't want to teach high school kids.
And it's only one you, and it's only one of you.
Right. And I had potential of all these teachers. And they say, yeah, but they don't know what to do. I said, what I'm asking them to do is easy for them. They can teach kids come in class. They can tell them to put on their apron. They can tell them to wash their hands. I show the teachers knife skills, or I bring in a video of knife skills, and they can follow and instruct the students on how to do it. And they can say, no, you're not holding your knife right, and so forth. Even if they don't have it, they know how to teach it from a teaching aid like a film. So that part never bothered me. And I, as you say, I was able to reach thousands of students through their teachers rather than me going into school and touching 25, 30 kids at a time.
But even though you've made a huge impact with CCAP, let's talk about, I want to know who were your mentor, who inspired you. Let's talk about your upbringing.
I learned that by when I had my awards breakfast, I would always invite one of the chefs to talk to the students, and they said, well, what should I tell them? I said, well, tell them what happened to you since high school. What were you doing in high school? Did you have an idea that you wanted to do this? Whatever it was, tell them how you got to where you are today. And that story, or those stories, may touch one of the people in the audience and say, oh, I can do that. So that will be a guide for them. And that is how I try to have young people think about their lives, what has happened to them in the past, what they liked, what they disliked, where they want to go if they have an idea, and how to get there. And because I've had that experience, I can mentor others. And as you said, who was my mentor? Well, I grew up, I was very fortunate. So my father was a surgeon in New York, quite successful. And my mother was a volunteer nurse during the war and volunteered most of her life. And my grandfather, who was in the imported woolen business, entertained the troops, the Army, the Navy. And I was just, 5, 6 at the time. My brother was 2 years older. I had pictures of us in naval uniform with a hat standing in front of all these soldiers. And so growing up, I would say that I was influenced by people who wanted to help others. I saw that from my parents and my grandfather. So that was, back here in the brain. It was part of what I grew up with. And then in school, I had problems in reading. I was a slow reader and I was a terrible speller. I used to come home with a report card and it would say, failed in spelling.
Wow.
I was a basic C student. And when I came home and I got a grade that would normally give me a B in history or math or English, an 85, and I got an 85 in spelling, and I said failed. And I said, how?
Wow.
I got a B in spelling. No, you had to have 90 to pass in spelling.
And above.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my mother said, don't worry, Richard. When you grow up, you'll have a secretary. She'll get all the spelling correct. And truthfully, I did have a secretary the first few years of my working career, but that disappeared when computers came out with spell checkers. And the fact that I was a slow reader slowed my education. That's why learning to read and learning to read well as a young person is so important. I mean, today we can learn through auditory. We have 2 different ways of learning. And if you're good at one, you will do more of that. But there are some things where you have to do both.
Yes.
And in college, I had to drop some literature classes and some history classes because I couldn't keep up with the reading. And I loved to learn through reading, but I was very slow.
Right.
So I got out. I almost told my father. I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and all through the first basketball championships, and it was exciting from that standpoint. But I told him I played soccer. I was a good soccer player, and I played tennis in high school, but I was only on the freshman team in college. But I told my father when I was a junior, I said, Dad, I think I'm wasting your money and my time. I'm thinking of quitting college. And he said, you only have one more year. And if you leave, you may never come back. And you've done that so far. Go through and get your degree.
Finish it.
So I didn't go to graduation, but my diploma came in the mail. And it was after that I have to go back to high school. I went to a boarding school in Pennsylvania. My parents didn't think growing up in New York was so great. It would be better for me to be out of the city. And I couldn't get into the top New York high schools. My academics weren't good enough. So my brother had gone to the same school in Pennsylvania. It's called the George School. At that time was one of very, very few co-ed boarding schools. In my senior year, I was a prefect. A prefect is like somebody supervising. There was a dorm supervisor who was a teacher, and then they had 2 seniors who were the prefects that would talk to the kids and make sure things were going well for them. So I was one of those 2 prefects in that dorm. And while I was in school there, we had to take a language, and my brother had the same language arts problem of reading and spelling, and they had him take Spanish, and he flunked Spanish. So they said, well, you got the same problems as your brother. Perhaps you should take German because German, it's closer to English. But they didn't tell me how difficult the grammar was. And so I didn't really care for German, but I took 2 years of it. There was a class where we took for our careers, for our future, they gave a test. And they're probably similar, still given today. I think the company was Kuda, Kuda or something, preference tests. And they gave you hundreds of questions. Which of these would you prefer? And you just circle one of 3 things that you preferred. And when you got through with seeing all those things, it would go off to the company. The computers would churn out your answers, and they'd come back with a recommendation. Oh, you're suited to be a lawyer. You're suited to be a doctor. You're suited to be an engineer. You're suited to be this. Because of my interest, they said, you're suited to be a social worker. And then they give you all the different types of work that you could do as a social worker. And I looked at this and I said, I don't want to do any of that. So after college, I went into the military for a short stint because I got into the National Guard. Nobody wanted to go into the Army. And so I didn't want to go into active military. And I was looking for a reserve or National Guard unit. Also, I wanted to go into the Navy or the Coast Guards because I loved being on the water. I thought I did. And there was a 3-year wait, so I didn't want to be drafted. And I read new unit of the Air Force National Guard opening up at Floyd Bennett Field in New York, and it's going to be a medical evacuation unit. Well, it's right in Brooklyn. I can get to that. Let me call them up. I said, I'm a college graduate. I'd like to come and get into your unit. And they said, do you have any medical background training? My father's a surgeon. Come on down. That was another background.
Right. That is hilarious.
When I got interviewed, they got me into their first group, and we went off to basic training, Lackland Air Force Base. And after that, we went to medical training at Andrews Air Force Base. And, I enjoyed. I had crossed off medicine while I was in college because I had started in pre-med, thinking that my father was a doctor. I should follow him. I watched him operate twice. But while I was getting medical training at Andrews, I sort of enjoyed it. I took blood pressure, I gave shots, I bandaged, I learned that. And then we went into pressure chambers to learn what happens at high altitudes if you lose your oxygen. It was quite interesting. And after that, we had 2 weeks in the summer and weekends, 1 weekend a month. We were called the Weekend Warriors. But in those days, the National Guard was called up during emergencies. But during my 2 weeks every summer, we would fly patients around the world. Siamese twins joined at the head in one flight. There were mental patients, psych patients. So I was nervous about that. But I learned a variety of things in the service. And I went to get a job after I'd gotten out of the active part of the military. And I really didn't know what I wanted. I had had a summer job in a department store out in California because my brother, who's a sculptor, had a grant out in California. And I went out with him. And while he was working on his sculpture, my uncle helped me get a job at the May Company, a department store. And I was put into the sports shirt department. So I wasn't a really great salesperson, and I didn't really care for it. So that was only one job in the department store, but I decided I didn't want that. And somebody came to me and said, Richard, you're interested in world trade? I said, yeah. I wrote this paper. And he said, well, there's a new college that just opened up in Arizona. It's called Thunderbird. And it gives master's degrees in foreign trade. So I looked into it, and I wasn't sure I could get in because of my college grades. And it required 2 languages. And I was not a linguistic at all. So I went to my father and I said, I think I'd want to go to Thunderbird to study foreign trade. And he said, you don't know anything about it. Why don't you get a job first and see if you like it? And if you like it, then you can go off to here. So I saw the logic to that. And I said, said, I don't know how to get a job in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, you had agencies that you'd go to, and they'd help you get interviews. Well, I went down to this agency and told them I was interested in exporting, because exporting, I'd been an economics student in college, and I knew that exporting was good for our economy, and that was important because I wanted to be in an area that was going to help the country as well. So in those days, entry-level jobs in exporting was a clerk typist. And I had taken typing in high school one semester before graduating. And through college, I did my papers, and I had gotten up to maybe 25 words a minute of typing.
That's okay. That's not bad.
Oh, yeah, but in those days.
But they get all the way up there to 70. They get up there.
Entry-level typing, they wanted you to be at 90 words a minute.
So I was at 75, 80, yep.
So I went from interview, and they'd say, yeah, you got the background, take this typing test. I flunked. It was like being spelling. I'd flunk every single test. So I was getting rather discouraged. And I in one morning to the agency, and the head of the agency said, Richard, I got the perfect job for you. What's that? There's a small import company down on Wall Street where the vice president is looking for an assistant. And I think you would be perfect for that. And I said, importing, that's bad for our economy. He said, yeah, but look, you're going to work for a seasoned vice president, you're going to learn a lot. You know, you're going to be coming in, not as a clerk typist, you're going to be coming in as assistant to somebody who knows the business. So
Definitely.
I went down and I got the job. Within probably 3 weeks, I heard that Charlie, that was my boss, was going to go on a trip around the world to visit our suppliers. And I said, oh, wouldn't that be a great idea? So I went into his office and I said, Charlie, I hear you're going on this trip around the world to see our suppliers. If I were to pay my way, could I go with you? One moment, Richard. And he went into the president's office, and they called me in. And the president said, you know, we've never had an employee who is so interested in learning the business that not only can you go with Charlie, but we'll pay your way.
That's awesome. Awesome.
I learned so much.
Wow.
I saw so much. I tasted so much.
Ooh.
You know, first we went to Japan, then we went to Taiwan, then we went to Hong Kong, traveled around India, and then we went to Spain, Greece. We went to Greece for a few days, then we went to Spain, and then came home. And my God, my eyes were opened, my palate was exploding with flavors, and I got home and I took up cooking as a hobby. And my brother, being a sculptor, and 2 other artist friends of his and myself, we bought a small farm, old dairy farm up in the Catskill Mountain, and dilapidated buildings and so forth. But we fixed it up enough to live in. And they took the barn and the other outbuildings and made studios, artist studios out of them. And on weekends, we'd go up. And while they were creating art, I was building a barbecue pit. I was planting vegetables. And I was cooking, and I had a cookbook by James Beard, and I was following recipes from that book. And I just loved cooking. And I had a small apartment in New York with 2 other young men, and they'd bring the dates home. The one would buy the wine, and I would cook. And we'd entertain. And one day, Charlie, who was a really gourmet cook, he came to me and he said, Rick, because my nickname in those days was Rick. I said, Rick, you enjoy cooking. I've got to go to Japan for a quick trip to see Yoshio, one of our suppliers. And I've signed up for a series of cooking classes. Would you take the first 2 that I'm going to miss? I said, Charlie, cooking classes, that's for women. And he said, yeah, but I've paid for them. Well, I call it Jewish guilt. My background is Jewish, and nobody from our surroundings would ever give up something that was free. So he had paid for them, and I said, I can't let the money go to waste. I'll take them. Well, little did I know that he had signed up for a series of classes with James Beard, and he was teaching in a house in Greenwich Village. He had a brownstone, and he had a kitchen where he would have 8 to 10 people come in for classes. And I wasn't in the class more than 10 minutes, and I was hooked. I loved it. And when Charlie came back and said, you don't have to take any more classes, I said, oh no, Charlie, I'm loving it. I'm going to stay. But there's room. You can come in for the other 4 classes. It was only a series of 6 classes. And that changed my view from just a hobbyist to a serious hobby. And I started reading and I started cooking more. And then after 6 years in the import business, and didn't love it, I really liked cooking more than my business. But I found myself out of a job with the idea that I was going to take a vacation. I hadn't taken a vacation in 6 years. And I was going to around the world again, looking for new opportunities. And because of the stress that I was under in trying to get the arrangements of moving the company and finding a company to move into and so forth, I wasn't eating properly and I was drinking coffee all day, and out that I developed an ulcer, stomach ulcer. And I went to a doctor and they discovered it. I said to my father, I said, ulcers in those days were thought of as being psychosomatic. And I said, maybe I should see a psychiatrist. I don't know why I got an ulcer. And he said, I don't believe in psychiatrists. The next day, however, he came home and he said, oh, I met one of my classmates from Columbia Medical School, and he happens to be a psychiatrist. So sure enough, I went to a psychiatrist, and after 3 visits talking to him, he said, you're the type of person that if you're in a crowded subway car and there's somebody stepping on your foot, you don't say anything because you come to the next stop, doors open, and there's movement of people, and he gets off your foot. I said, how did you know? He said, well, from what you told me, that's your personality. I said, you're right. I hate confrontation. I hated to. He said, a couple of things of advice. He said, I would recommend that you start to learn how to tell people to get off your foot. And I would tend to look for a career where you're not working for someone else. And because the frustration I had in working with Charlie, I said, we don't have much time to do all these arrangements. Let me do the correspondence to the suppliers. No, I want to do that. I said, what about our customers? Can I write to them? No, that's for me to do. So I kept worrying, and I couldn't solve the problem. I couldn't do it because somebody else told me, no, I'm going to do it. So I was drinking, and he said, you were frustrated by that, which pours acid into your stomach. You weren't eating properly. So that's, you were drinking coffee, that's more acid into your stomach. And going out at night and having some drinks, that's alcohol, that burns. So you were basically burning a hole in yourself. He said, eat properly, eat 3 meals a day, and find a job that you're not under that type of stress, easier said than done, and tell people to get off your foot, stand up for yourself. And because I had an ulcer, they advised me not to travel around the world, because in those days, to treat an ulcer, you had to drink milk every 2 hours. You had to take 2 different types of medication. I had a lot of time to think. And my father had always said to me, he said, and to my brother also, he said, no matter what you do in life, I'll be happy if you find something that you enjoy and you do a good job at it, that he would be proud of me. And so that focus is where I had been thinking all along. And I didn't want to be a doctor, and I didn't want to major in business, and my academics were never going to make me a lawyer. I had no direction really in college. But here I am skiing in Europe, thinking about what my father said to me. And he said, grandfather and I have put money aside for you boys to go to school, study whatever you want, and find your way. And as long as you enjoy what you're doing and do a good job, I'll be proud of you. So I said, I was 28 by this time. And I said, he's right. I said, life is short and you should be doing something in your life, if you can, that you like to do. So I said to myself, well, what do you like to do? Well, I like to ski. I like to cook. Maybe you could have a little restaurant in the mountains in Colorado. Do both. And I said, but you gotta find out whether you can cook professionally. And in those days, and you've never had another job to know whether this is hard or not, it's the work that you're doing. And in time, you get good at what you do in the beginning. You get faster. Anyway, I had looked into schools in Germany and in France and Holland, and I was too old. I went in my travels, I stopped in Paris because I had a cousin, a Canadian cousin, who was working for the UN in Paris. And I stayed with him for a few days. And while I was there, he said, what are you doing in Paris? I said, I've decided that I love to cook and I want to go and learn at the Cordon Bleu. And he said, but you don't speak French. And I said, he said, they teach in French. You have to understand French at least to go to the school. So I said, where do I go? Alliance Française. There's a l'Institut de Rennes in Tours, France, that specializes in teaching foreigners French. So that's where I went. I went down there. That I was traveling all over Europe with. And I went to tour. I signed up for classes. And do you want to live with a family while you're here? That's good. I spent the summer in Vienna with a family, and I knew you could learn more living with a family than you could do on your own. And I was learning French. And so I wrote to the school, said, can I come up and attend a class? And one day, one class, and I was in heaven. It was like, wow, like James Beard that had changed my life. This class from the school and teaching, can I sign up right away? Yeah, you can sign up, but we don't have a spot for you for 4 months. And then for several months, I traveled around Europe, visited my ski instructor in Austria. I went to Nice. I went to Corsica, took a ferry over to Corsica, got into an accident with a car, have it fixed up in Nice. And, I traveled around, went up to Norway and Sweden and Denmark. And, I was tasting and eating and drinking different things. And I went to Paris and I got an apartment, and it's very small. And I fixed up one room, which was a kitchen and bathroom, not toilet, but the shower. It was the biggest room in the apartment, and I had a pastry stand made. I got a piece of marble for it, and I got another butcher block table that I made, my knives. And I would cook every Wednesday and Saturday for friends. And I met a lot of French and Americans while I was in Paris. One of the Americans I met. And so I'm back cooking. And one Saturday, spring Saturday, I look out my window to find the sky. And so I was walking the streets of Paris, and I was having a grand old time and just loving it. And it hits me. If I had a restaurant, I couldn't do that. I couldn't put a sign on the door saying gone fishing. Many of the things that I had to learn, because the French don't teach in an organized fashion. They just teach the recipes and didn't teach the techniques. You learn the techniques. It was, like an apprenticeship. And that's what I started to do. I tried to change things. And so near the end of the program, the head of the school had interviewed me in the beginning of the program, and I told her I wanted to perhaps have a small restaurant in the mountains. And at the end of it, she said, what are your thoughts about when you leave here? And I said, I found that two things. I found out that I'm not fast enough to be a chef, and I'm not I can't multitask. I could do one thing, focus on it and do it, but I couldn't do 10 things at once. Yeah. And I always start with small groups of people in my home and teach them like I had been taught by James Beard. So they then went on a ski trip for a week, I took off from the school. When I came back, she called me into her office and she said, while you were away, I had a vice president of a department store in Cleveland, Ohio, come and ask me if I could send one of my chefs to Cleveland to teach a course in their department store. I can't send one of my chefs who doesn't speak English, doesn't know American ingredients. Wow. Would you do that for me? I said, I haven't even graduated, and you want me to teach for the Cordon Bleu in America?
Wow.
And she said, yes, I've spoken to the chef. He thinks very highly of you. And with a few extra pointers, we feel that you could do it. Wow. I said, if you have confidence in me, I'd love to do it.
Mm-hmm. And that opportunity.
And that was the beginning of my career. And she wasn't my first, but she was my mentor that opened the door for me to do what I did.
Wow.
And years later, just in recent years, I thought of that because I was thinking of mentoring, because I've been mentoring hundreds of kids over the last 30 years. And mentoring is often very easy for the mentor and life-changing for the mentee.
It is.
To be an older person who's just never done it, to have the confidence to do something beyond what they think they can do. And she was my mentor at that time. That led to 15 years of teaching all around the country, Canada, in major department stores, not on the housewares floor, but in a setting that was built to look like the Cordon Bleu in Paris. And then another whole chapter on why I left the school and how I helped the school be sold to the Cointreau family, and how my wife and I were partners for 4 months. And then I had to leave because they didn't really want a partner. They wanted me to do all the teaching and the writing and the television and so on. And when I left, I found out that the department stores couldn't hire me as Richard Grausman teaching French cooking because people didn't know me. They knew me as the chef from the Cordon Bleu. So they said, if you had a cookbook, we could promote the book and the classes. So that's when I wrote my book, At Home with the French Classics. Subsequently, after many years, been redone a few years back, and we changed the title to French Classics Made Easy. Because I had wanted the title to originally be Who's Afraid of French Cooking? And everybody was too fat, I can't pronounce it, it's too rich, it's too fancy. And so my publisher, I gave him that suggestion, Who's Afraid of French Cooking? And he said, no, this is my first French cookbook. I want a title that reflects the serious nature of French cooking. And because of that, and to me, I wanted to teach French cooking to everyone.
Yes.
And I looked at cooking more like French cooking, Chinese cooking, Japanese cooking, Greek. They were the cooking of those countries. And in those countries, everybody ate the food, everybody cooked the food. And there's no difference between a French person and an American person. It's just that you don't know about it. And, and once you learn something, it becomes second nature to you. And so that's the reason I got into cooking originally. And I kept thinking, and that's when, I had a publicist that took me down to Philadelphia. Somebody said, who knew my book, said, would you like to promote a product, Dorman's cheese. Dorman is like Kraft cheese company, and they came out with the first low cholesterol cheese and wanted me to go down to Philadelphia and promote it. And I said, what do I have to do to promote it? Well, we'll get you interviews because of your book with food writing, and we'll get you on television. We'll get you in stores to do something with their cheese. And so I made cheese puffs and a cheese omelet and, did something with it. But as I did that for 3 days, and then we came back on the train, and the publicist said, what do you do? And I gave her my history. And she said, would you ever come out to our high school in Great Neck, Long Island, to teach the kids? And I said, same type of reaction I had when Charlie said, will you take my cooking class? I said, that's for women. I don't teach kids. I teach adults. I teach young chefs. I teach people who are interested in cooking, hobbyists and so forth. I don't teach kids. 2 months go by, maybe 3. And I'm, promoting the book, and I'm finding that sales aren't as good as I wanted them, or as good as the publisher thought they would be. And went to a conference, teacher cooking industry conference, it's called International Association of Culinary Professionals. And I left that conference, and my brain, started thinking. And then I'm taking a shower one day. Some of my best thinking was in the shower. I'm in the shower, and all of a sudden, a light bulb goes off in my head. And I was, say, 52 at the time that I was thinking of this. But that morning, it goes off in my head and says, if there was something I could do in the latter part of my life to change that forecast that I had just heard of a future of cooking, what would it be? And immediately I said, you got to get into schools. How would you get into schools? What would you do? I said, well, you really should get in at the earliest stage. You should get in at kindergarten, preschool. At that early time, you can teach kids sensory evaluation. And I saw this as a brilliant way of teaching. I could envision that if you started, you'd have to teach the teachers how to use sensory for their kids. But if you look back, they were already doing it for years in a, not a structured way, but in a show and tell. Teacher would come in and show you something and then tell you about it. And I could see that if you trained a person's ear in music and sounds and color, it enters every aspect of one's life. And I could see somebody who was trained on sensory being able to come out of a New York subway, and instead of just hearing the horns and the traffic, they'd notice the birds chirping. And you go into a restaurant and you'd start to look at the structure of the restaurant. You'd start to appreciate architecture, drawing. Your eye may be trained so that you notice things that you didn't notice before. And I saw this as a means of affecting the education of Americans in a way that no matter what level of the economic stratus that they would end up in, they'd be able to enjoy life at a much higher level. They'd be turning down the amplification because, their ears were trained, and that was noise rather than music. They would notice the flavors. They began herbs and so forth, teach them. And I saw teaching, the young ones, raw vegetables and cooked vegetables, see what the difference is, taste. And so I saw using food as the means to teach sensory. You have food at lunch counters, you had food in the kitchens, you had food everywhere. So if you start to teach about it, tastes and so on, maybe people would start to say, oh, that's too salty. And we could get rid of some of the salt, because salt and sugar are just used to satisfy the basic palate and instinct. I mean, a baby is taught to like sugar from mother's milk, which is sweet. So you have to, but if your taste buds are more adept, you learn that you don't need all of that.
Right.
And other flavors and herbs and spices can be used to affect, change and enjoyment of food. Wow. And then I figured after elementary school, you get into middle school, and you can start using sensory education that you've taught to use in geography, history, social differences. Why have all the people in the islands, the Black communities and populations from the islands, why are they coming to America? I mean, they're living in a better climate. They grow things. I couldn't quite understand that. Well, you start to look at it and you understand, well, how did they get there? It was through slavery. And slavery brought them to the islands. And as slaves, they didn't enjoy the beauty of the island and so forth. Tourists did, and they were slavery to servitude. They became servants and serving the elite. And they, for one reason or another, they left there for a better life in the States, and there was prejudice in the States. And you started to understand through this why why we treat people the way we do, why there's been food of people. Where did we get peppers from?
Right.
Did they come from Mexico or did they come from China? Where did tomatoes come from? How did they get here? And fish, fish became a staple, dried fish.
Right.
People wanted to own the waters off of certain countries because of the plant, the amount of fish that you could get. And that became a staple. And you needed the salt to preserve them, and where'd the salt come from? And that became a commodity. So you can use food to teach help teach all these other subjects. And you can use sensory in a chemistry class. A teacher shows you a piece of cotton fabric and another one synthetic fibers and feel it. What do you feel? What's the difference? Well, let's find out why it feels that way. Here's the formula. All of a sudden, the formula
that is powerful.
Becomes interesting. Before that, teacher would come in, put a formula on the board, and half the class would go to sleep.
Wow.
So sensory could become a tool, a teaching tool.
To change the world. Yeah.
To engage people, to help educate, enlighten, to make them inquisitive, to get them to look and see things differently.
Wow.
And then I figured if you had somebody at the high school level, and they had a palate and a passion, it wouldn't be hard to teach them, prepare them for the industry. But my cookbook, I thought, could be read by a high school population. And I knew that home economics was in terrible shape. And I thought by using my book to teach the teachers some of the dishes in my book, that I could get the teachers to teach the kids. The kids would take the recipes home. Their parents would eat it and say, that's a great apple pie.
Right.
Where'd you get the recipe? And they say, oh, that's not an apple pie. That's an apple tart. But it came from a book that we are using in our classroom. Well, what's the book? At Home with the French Classics. So then the parent would go and buy the book, and my population would then get my book. So that was the way I was thinking, and the reason that I went into the schools. And I went to the Board of Ed. My wife had been a teacher for a short time, and we went to the Board of Ed in New York and told them what my idea was. And they said, great idea, Mr. Grausman, but we don't have the money for the equipment and the food that the teachers. So I said, can I go into one of your classrooms? They said, this classroom in Brooklyn. In those days, they locked the door after class started. If you weren't there on time, you didn't get into the classroom. You had to go down to the principal. But they also locked the doors because they didn't want people to go out of the classroom during a class.
Gotcha.
To go on the staircases and get into trouble. So that surprised me that the kids were being locked in the classroom. And that day, in one part of the kitchen, big room, and there was like a part of it was just tables and chairs, and the other were 6 little kitchens where kids were cooking. And larger area, there was a group of Haitian students who had just arrived from Haiti, and they were being taught English. And I went around and followed the teacher and watched what he was doing. He was making bread with the class. And while they were doing that, I was opening cupboards and pulling out drawers. And I saw they were bare. They didn't, the school system was right. They didn't have the money for the equipment. So at the end of the class, I went up to the teacher who had been told to let me observe. And I introduced myself, and I told him that I've been teaching French cooking for the Cordon Bleu for 15 years. And if there was something that I could do to help him, what would it be? He laughed at me. I said, why? He said, I used my own money today to buy the flour to make the bread.
They needed funding.
They needed money. So I went back to my office that day, and I had met all these manufacturers of equipment and products that over the years for my classes, the department stores would say, what should we have on hand to sell to the people coming in for classes? So I worked with Woodstoff and Forstner and Calphalon and All Clad and Cuisinart. And I called them all up and I said, here's what I want to do. And they said, great idea, Richard. We've always wanted to help the schools, but we really didn't know how. You give them money, they misspend it. You give them product, they destroy it. But if you have a program, we'll help you.
We can
And they said,
support you.
yeah, like Cuisinart said to me, oh, well, how many machines will you need? I said, well, each class has 6 kitchens, and I'm going to start with 12 schools. So 72 machines would be great. And he said, oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. I said, how about 12? I'll take 1 per school. And, oh, yeah, we can do that. So
Wow.
I got everybody set up to send products. And then I said, I better check these teachers to see what their skills are like. So I spent a day, and in the morning, I demonstrated an omelet, a souffle, a coq au vin, a ratatouille, niçoise.
Right. All of the good.
I was cutting up vegetables and making sauces. And then I would have them repeat that in groups in the afternoon, each group working on a different dish. And in observing them, I realized these teachers were coming in with skill level all over the place. There were some who were, housewives before they were teachers or something. And they cooked at a very minimal level. There were others who had been camp cooks in the summer, where they cooked for hundreds of kids. And so they were food service type chefs.
Right. Just starting out.
Yeah. And so I had the thought that they needed more training. So I went to the French Culinary Institute, which is a cooking school in New York. And I said, what's the opportunity for you to give a class, say, on the weekends for our teachers? And they said, well, we can do that. For I don't know how many months these teachers would go to class and they'd learn the technique that I needed them to learn. They loved it. They were so appreciative. Then they started getting these packages. Gift packages, Christmas, Hanukkah.
Right.
It was
all the good stuff.
They couldn't believe that anyone had promised them something and then delivered on it.
Right. Wow.
So the teachers got very excited. And then I went into the classes started in February after the new semester. And I went into the classrooms to give a demonstration to the kids. And that's when I saw that, there were some kids that were sleeping, some kids drawing notes, but there were a couple that were glued to what I was doing.
Right.
And they asked some questions. And then I watched them cook. And, they were all engaged doing something because they were going to eat the cookies after class. And I'd go around and somebody would come up and say, hey, mister, what do you think of my cookies? Good. A little too much sugar in there, but very good. Next time, cook it a little more. It needs a little more color. Turn the oven up a little higher because it has to be crispy. And I started to ask them, I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? Don't know. I said, ever think of cooking? Can I? And truthfully, Diamond, I didn't know. I hadn't worked in restaurants. And I went to dinner that night, small French restaurant in Lexington Avenue in New York. And I said to the chef owner, I said, I'm just starting this program in high schools. And what's the opportunity for a high school graduate to come into your restaurant, in your kitchen? And he sort of laughed at me. He said, come, look at my kitchen. I'm importing labor from South America and Asia. Much prefer to have a New York kid that speaks English. I said, what do you need? Need him to show up on time. That's where I learned the 5 things that were needed. So then I said,
that's what it got connected.
Yeah. I said, what else do you need? Show us up on time, I'll teach him. So that's how the basis for CCAP got started. Of course.
Well, even with your entire story, I loved how you connected all the dots. And I want to be respectful of your time too, but I want to get one last thing out. So as you've shared your entire story yourself and with CCAP, what is 1 or 2 things that you would want someone to take away from your entire journey?
Well, find out what you like, what you like to do, and don't let people tell you you can't do it. You just have to learn what you have to learn to be able to do that. I mean, that thinking process should start young. But you need, in the old days, family members would tell you, be a fireman. Your father's a fireman. Get into jet propulsion because the planes are just beginning to get into computers, get into chemistry, get into pharmacy. That's where the money is. That's where the jobs are. We got jobs growing in energy, in computers and computer chips, and all.
Right.
And we're investing in this country into lots of industries, which are wonderful if you're interested. If you're just interested, if you're just interested in a better salary, you're not going to find enjoyment. So start with that basis of what would you like to do? And some of the things that you want to do, don't come overnight. You got to work hard at it. I want to be a musician. Well, you got to practice and practice and learn your notes. And so there are certain industries that are really hard to get into. So happens our industry is easy to get into.
Right.
But
you just got to enter.
And once you get into it, then you have to learn. And so your studying may not be in school, it may be on the job, but you can't just say, I got a job and they're going to teach me. You've got to, be inquisitive. You got to learn. You got to read. You got to ask questions. Nothing is handed to you. You got to learn it. So that's one thing I like to pass on.
That is powerful. When I think about your entire story, I think about not only someone who had a chance to navigate and experience so many things, but you also had the thinking of, I want to open up doors for so many people. Wow. So thank you. Thank you, Rich. I greatly appreciate you joining me inside of the studio. Richard, can you tell them how they can connect with you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. We have a website, CCAP, Careers to Culinary Arts Program. Lots of information on the program and how to connect and how teachers in the industry can connect with us, etc.
Richard, thank you again for joining us inside of the studio. Everyone, if y'all need anything, feel free to reach out to me. Diamond McNulty signing out. I'll see y'all again. Have a wonderful day. Take care.